Last week, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe wrote in a Wall Street Journal op-ed that China poses the greatest threat to America today and the greatest threat to democracy and freedom worldwide since World War II. Beijing intends to dominate the U.S. and the rest of the planet economically, militarily, and technologically. We'll look at this claim and what patriots can do about it in this episode of Activate America, Getting Active to Throw Off Government Tyranny. Since before the inception of Communist China, U.S. foreign policy has been to help communists take power and then grow in economic success. Now imagine that. The United States building and sustaining an enemy that is now its main threat. It seems inexplicable until you realize the forces that you're dealing with. World domination is not just a comic book storyline. It's a plot for globalists and elitists who want to control all of humanity. Now, while this sounds a bit surreal, not even the fiction writers of the Twilight Zone could compete with this truth. In 1951, Mr. Robert Welch, who would form the John Birch Society 7 years later, wrote a letter to a friend who had asked him about China. The letter grew into a book called May God Forgive Us, published in 1952. In it, Mr. Welch wrote that Mao's communists had conquered the country within 5 years after the end of World War II. He said this was impossible to do so by force. Instead, it was accomplished by an almost unbelievable combination of trickery, chicanery, and treason. At every step, Mao Zedong could have been stopped by our government, and usually by simply carrying out orders of the American Congress and giving Chiang Kai-shek the supplies Congress had actually voted him. Instead, we deliberately turned over rule of China's 400 million people to Stalin's stooge. A communist economic system cannot sustain itself. It's a bankrupt system that has failed every single time it has been tried. Communism would have been stamped out of existence in Russia and China if the United States had not come to their aid time and time again. While most Americans don't know this, they may have heard about China's plot to infiltrate and conquer the U.S. In his book, China, the Deep State's Trojan Horse in America, former CEO of the John Birch Society, Arthur Thompson, explains how we empower this totalitarian regime. Frankly, China would not be much of a threat if it were not for the deep state within our country that is not only helping China to become powerful, but helping to grow China's strength within the United States in business, trade, our education system, and so many aspects of our society. All this while generally going unnoticed by our citizens, Thompson wrote. Citizens are beginning to see China's depths of depravity as revealed by insiders. For instance, on his Fox News show, Tucker Carlson aired part of a speech from an economics professor who is also an associate dean of the School of International Studies at Renmin University in Beijing, a Dr. D. Dongsheng. Professor Dongsheng bragged that between 1992 and 2016, the U.S. and China were able to settle a myriad of differences because we have people at the top of America's core inner circle of power and influence. The Washington Times reported the professor is a frequent consultant to Chinese Communist Party and government organs. The speech was given in China and quickly deleted from social media platforms in China soon after its upload. The professor also suggested the Obama administration was easy to manipulate, and China had been working to burrow its way into America's core leadership for the last 30 to 40 years, especially through infiltrating Wall Street firms. Mr. Carlson reported that Professor D said Wall Street has had enormous influence over American policies since the 1970s. He also reported the Chinese government has tremendous influence over Wall Street. However, beginning in 2016, Wall Street ran into a problem. Professor D said it couldn't fix Trump. Trump started a trade war with China, and the professor's Wall Street friends told him they tried to help fix the situation, but couldn't do so. In the video, Professor D said the traditional elite, the political elite, and the establishment are all very close to Wall Street. He confirmed China helped to build the foundation of Hunter Biden's business dealings in China. And, as Mr. Carlson mentioned, now you know why you weren't allowed to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop. Why big business aligned as one, the tech companies and all the rest, to suppress that story because they were implicated. As the New American summed up, it's also clearer still why China has gotten away with stealing our intellectual property and defense technology, bullying our businesses, censoring our movies, and putting its propaganda in American schools and universities via its Confucius Institutes. It's for the same reason why we've had what Trump rightly described as stupid trade deals. But the reality is that our pseudo-elites are not that stupid. Rather, they're bought off, either directly or indirectly, as they get rich selling out the American dream and threatening our very survival. But folks, it's more than that. As Mr. Thompson wrote in his book, the enemy of communism is freedom, and the most free country is the United States, which makes us the primary target of the communist, particularly the Chinese communist. Now, the goal of communism is to establish one world government, eliminate God from your life, and replace him with government. The Chinese communist sees it as his or her objective to use espionage, propaganda, and other subversive activities to render the United States a communist cog under a one world government. When you see news events within this framework, you begin to see why things happen as they do. America will not be taken over by force. Rather, it will be by way of an insidious inside attack. The communists as a whole have over a century of experience with subversive takeovers that end with them at the top and you a subject of the state. This happened in Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Russia, China, and many of the old Soviet satellite states such as Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany. That idea that something like this cannot happen here is a smokescreen of ignorance. What you have seen with COVID-19, BLM riots, climate change propaganda, and now with the election is clear evidence of forces working within our country to divest it of freedom and independence. So what do? As they say, the action is always in the reaction. If our response is violence, then we play right into their game and we'll see America fall like a ripe fruit into the hands of the globalists, with local police being turned into federal police, martial law stripping away our freedoms, and emergency powers replacing our God-given rights. Instead, we should work to restore the system our founders built to ensure government has its proper place. That place is not one in which it lords over us. Constitutional American government is designed to protect our God-given rights and works only within its tightly defined constitutional powers. The founders recommended educating the electorate so each American knows the proper role of government, as well as understands our role as citizens in keeping our elected officials accountable to the Constitution. This is what the John Birch Society has been doing for 62 years. We organize in small groups in our local communities, then we plan and act to educate voters, business owners, clergy, elected officials, and other opinion leaders in our local communities. That any of this is happening is no surprise to our organization. The JBS has been warning of this threat for decades. Now, we don't know what will happen to the latest Supreme Court election case filed by Texas. The Trump administration took concrete steps to protect America from the Chinese communist threat. And based on Biden's prior rhetoric and experience in the Obama administration, the Chinese communists bent on wiping away American freedom and independence would have a friend in a President Biden. No matter what happens with the election outcome, 2021 will be a busy one for patriots. We just finished publishing the January 2021 JBS Bulletin for members. In it, we suggest members focus on state legislators as a way of cleaning up the election mess. We need to get rid of things such as early voting, same-day registration, automatic voter registration via the Motor Voter Act, and mail-in only balloting. we must also cut all ties and send all equipment from foreign countries to the local junkyard crusher. We'll have more on this in future episodes. The best advice to give is to understand the state legislative process in your state and talk to your legislators about securing elections and restoring election integrity. To ensure you are getting our latest legislative alerts, sign up for them at jbs.org. This will be an essential communication tool for your 2021 efforts, if you're not already receiving them. Links are in the video description. If you are not yet a JBS member, we invite you to apply for membership. With your help, one member at a time, one leader at a time, we will stop tyranny and restore the American Republic for all Americans. Will you act today? Until next time, this is Bill Hahn for the John Birch Society saying stay active, everyone.